So which Warhammer armies are doing best in the tournament stats right now? Let's talk through 8 of the most powerful ranked by win rate and why they're strong right now. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking strong armies in Warhammer 40k, and in this one I thought I'd do a counterpart to the weakest armies in the game video, and for this one focusing on the upper end of army power and the factions that seem to be having a slightly easier time of it than some in 40k. For this video I thought we'd go through the armies by tournament win percentage, which I think is a nice enough rough and ready metric for overall army power, even if it does have its downsides and limitations, going through from the armies that ranked somewhere towards the middle in the pack to the ones at the very top. As well as that, we'll take a look at armies that have won lots of big events, that perhaps better showing the power of the army at the highest level of play more so than win rate, as you'll often have factions that have a high win rate but don't necessarily have the best chance to compete against some of the best armies in the game played by the best people, just due to a bit of a skill ceiling. There's a whole ton of places that track 40k stats: StatCheck 40k, Den of Fools, Meta Monday, Goonhammer Stat Center, and Best Coast Pairings for tournament winning lists and placings. And this one's going to be a bit of a broad brush overview, taking a bit of data from a bunch of those sources. In general at the moment though, game balance really isn't in such a bad place right now. A few factions do have various issues, and there's maybe one or two in particular that seem to stick out the top a bit, but compared with 40k's history, certainly towards the top end of the meta, lots and lots of stuff is able to win and do well. And if anything, at first impressions it seems to be doing better than it was perhaps prior to the last balance update, as it's been for a while in Warhammer 40k. Broadly, the choice of army and the skill commanding it is going to have more of an impact versus the choice of faction for once in 40k, something that hasn't been true for the majority of the game's history. For this one in particular though, given the factions in 40k are pretty well balanced right now, I bear in mind that the strongest armies at a more casual level to the average player won't necessarily be the strongest armies at the absolute top level of play, with Grand Tournament winners duking it out against each other with hyper-optimized setups. In general, I like to do these top 10 strongest videos by win rate, as I think that's far more relevant to your average player, reflecting the typical experience of most players going to a Grand Tournament with a list that's at least okay. At the highest end of play though, there's certain armies that can just go a bit further than others. In particular, there tend to be some like, say, Custodians and Knights typically, which often tend to function as a bit more of a stat check type army, good at bullying sort of mid-strength lists, but coming undone against people who know how to play against them really well. And different armies have different sort of degrees of that, where they might have a high win rate but fall down a bit at the top level. In terms of stats, it means that as well as just win rate, higher placings and actual tournament wins are both really relevant as well, and I'll try and talk about that as we go along. In any case though, for the ones that we're going to focus, it will be the higher ones on the overall win rates. I talked about some of the lower placing ones previously, and then here we have the mid tier: Imperial Knights, Adeptus Mechanicus, Drukhari, Chaos Marines, Space Wolves and Thousand Sons all on 49%, and then Tyranids, Eldari and Tau Empire all on 48%. It does appear that for the vast majority of armies, 40k is in a better place than it's been for really quite a long time in terms of having lots of factions that are somewhere in this sort of midpoint of the game, easily able to get wins with a good list played well, but certainly not overpowered to the extent where they're just crushing the opposition and they aren't beatable. Getting into the top 8 though, and most of these at the moment don't seem to be all that much higher than average, most of them within 3% or so of those numbers. First up in 8th place we have the Blood Angels, win rates of 50%, which is pretty well balanced, seemingly perhaps just a tiny bit ahead of the curve by early tournament data. They've only won the one grand tournament in Pariah Nexus so far, and that was with a slightly unusual Ironstorm list. In terms of top level placings, they haven't had quite as much as some of the armies out there, particularly in the context of a fair few people taking them out and putting them on the table in the wake of their recent codex. The last balance pass was when they got their points. A lot of focus was on their Liberator Assault group, which has indeed turned out to be the most played detachment in tournaments. Basically the previous Sons of Sanguinius, but with a few trade-offs like slightly worse Red Rampage and losing fights on death access, but still being able to hit really quite hard, gaining advance and charge and a fun Smash Captain combo. Though I guess a few of the Space Marine changes also had relevance as well. Jump Intercessors did go up a bit too. In terms of tournament play, it really is the Liberator group far more than any of the rest of the detachments being played. Perhaps some of the biggest staples are Lamatis and a big blob of Death Company with jump packs, Chief Librarian Mephiston with just big stats and being a lone operative. Sanguinary Guard are played at least fairly regularly, often with Dante, and the Smash Captain with Rage Fueled Warrior having a massive turn of sustained hits 3 on the same turn that he gets his +3 attacks bonus. Gives you a scary little combo with Assault Intercessors that can threaten to warm round a whole bunch of scary stuff in the game. They definitely have enough damage on their big assault units to wipe out big scary threats in one go. They might come a bit unstuck if they're forced to trade out badly and hit something that's not really quite worthy of them. and sometimes you might have some hard decisions as to when and where to commit on the board, and might be a little bit terrain dependent as well as to whether or not they can hide everything before getting shot. In general though, by the win rates they seem to be doing okay, and I certainly wouldn't be too surprised if people manage to have a bit more success with them in tournaments in the future. Next up, and ranked in a lore appropriate 7th place, we have the Death Guard. Their win rate's also around about 50%, just the one big tournament win in Pairings so far, but they also went undefeated in a couple more over the past few weeks, and plenty more high placings beyond this. The balance update broadly had a whole bunch of positive things for them. Death Shroud Terminators dropping down to 110 per 3 of them. It's just a fairly fantastically dangerous block of stats. Mortarians far better now at 300 points. The Biologist Putrefier that was also auto-included with Plague Marines went down in cost. And for allied support, both Wardog Brigands and Beast of Nurgle dropped down, which certainly didn't hurt either. All that really wasn't too bad given that they were kind of mid-tier to start with. After several balance passes, the majority of their unique stuff is pretty playable now. Death Shrouds are all very nasty with Typhus and Sorcerers along. Plague Marines and Rhinos with Biologist Putrefiers can take down a whole bunch of big threats, and you could add in a Foul Blight Spawn for fights first. Their Demon Engines are largely quite playable, fairly cheap and effective bloat drones and blight haulers. Their Predator tanks are quite nice if you want some gun turrets that can take advantage of contagions, and as mentioned they can get on quite well with allied war dogs that can make use of the contagion debuffs as well, provide some fast moving objective control, and also Nurglings to screen out the midboard and provide some hit debuffs of their own. For weaknesses, they can be a little bit slow moving and not quite as flexible. Compared with a bunch of armies out there, the Death Shroud Terminators are maybe one of the units that can be played around better than some given their very slow movement characteristic. They don't really want to be in a position where the enemy's just falling back from them and they're not getting the charges that they want to. And there are still some units in the Codex that feel rather overshadowed or underplayed. Plague Burst Crawlers aren't hitting the table quite as much as they used to, and Blight Lord Terminators felt like the ones that probably needed the points cut if any of them. It was weird to see the Death Shroud drop down, but not them. In any case though, they seem to be doing pretty solidly. They definitely feel justified on this list as one of the more intimidating armies in the game to play against right now. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in the Magnet Baron. As the name suggests, he's a supplier of all things magnetic, with a bunch of offerings that could be handy enough if you're trying to convert 40k models to be able to swap out the armaments. So say you could have an Imperial Knight and swap out the guns, with a bunch of dedicated stuff to support wargaming, and in particular high quality magnets that aren't going to let you down. They're based in the USA, they can ship worldwide, though it might be a bit more expensive to do so due to international shipping and import duties. For some examples of their popular things, they've got a magnetising starter bundle, a selection of drill bits with a pin vise, some magnet applicators, a good selection of different size ones to get you going, plus some glue. Could be of interest if you just want a single purchase to basically have a custom crafting magnet kit all at once. And then they've got lots of more custom products, things like magnetised flight stands, and kits that are aimed at specific models such as this Questoris Knight one, with a whole bunch of 3D printed bits that you don't even have to drill or anything, and comes with all the bits to craft a knight that you can swap out all weapon options. In any case, they'll be linked down in the video description if you want to check them out, and I'll cycle back to talk through a little bit more of their range at the end of the video. In any case, thanks for sponsoring this. Moving onwards and upwards in the win rate rankings though, next up we've got the Leagues of Votann placing in 6th. These guys had the highest win rates after the first weekend, though as suspected they did drop down a bit. I did suspect that individual result might be a bit down to chance just by how high it was. They're still doing absolutely fine though, with win rates around 51%, 2 big tournament wins in Pairings so far, plus another undefeated run. Certainly showing that they can do well at a top level. They were a fairly solid mid-tier faction before, and then a bunch of their competitors got nerfed. They didn't have that many changes in the balance update. There was a small nerf to Hernkin Jaegers and a small buff to smaller squads of Einherjar Hearthguard. And I don't think that anyone was really expecting seismic changes, given that for quite a while now the Leagues of Votann army list has largely been pretty playable for each unit. Some things feel a bit more emphasised, but everything can have a role if you want it to. Sagittor is often a staple, transporting either berserks or split squads of Hearthkin. Land fortresses are a big threat in their own right and can deliver units into battle. They can work well with those smaller squads of Einherjar Hearthguard, re-rolling some wound rolls with Vulcanite. Hernkin Pioneers are generally helpful to get a bunch of Judgment Token autocannon fire on the go early. Einherjar Champions are perhaps one of the most commonly taken units to lead those Hearthguard, and they can still be used in big squads teleporting if you want them to, with a good focus for the Sustained Hits 2 stratagem or their Void Armour, and there's still often one unit of Jaegers in an army to screen and infiltrate and allow those scout moves. I feel like going up to 2 of them is less common than it was before. As a faction, the talking point often tends to be is that they just don't really have all that much in the way of sneaky tricks at high level play. generally just relying on judgment tokens and some damage and defensive stratagems to give and receive big amounts of damage. And so far in 10th edition, that's often translated to them having a fairly high win rate percentage, but not really all that many big tournament wins, though it seems from the early stats they're not doing too bad on either since the update. They certainly don't have all that many datasheets in their range though, and that might be one of the things that limits their complexity a little bit. They'll certainly be eagerly awaiting their next codex with the opportunity to get a few more units added into the mix, I'm sure. Next up, we've got the Battle Sisters of the Adepta Sororitas, previously arguably the single strongest faction in Warhammer 40k, though after the balance change they're looking far more mid-tier, win rates more like 51% again. I feel like it does just speak to how finely tuned 40k's balance is, that the 5th best army can only be just this close to 50%. Sisters certainly seem to be one of the armies that's performing best at high level tournament play though. 3 big tournament wins in Pariah Nexus so far, and having gone undefeated in 2 more events besides that, certainly still shows they've got the power and the big abilities to be able to do well, if they're played by people who know the faction well. The last balance update had a whole bunch of nerfs for the army. The Bringers of Flame army that they tended to field was maybe a little bit cookie cutter and obvious. Things like Immolators, Dominions, Castigators, Morven Val, and the Triumph of St. Catherine, all of which went up. Though it does still seem that with its focus on speed and close range shooting, Bringers of Flame is still the single most played one, but compared with before there's a bigger proportion of people going for either Hallowed Martyrs or the Army of Faith. In particular, the Hallowed Martyrs one seems to be doing rather well, at least one event win for that, plus good performance on the win rates. In terms of strong units, basically all the things that got nerfed are still rather good. Val and Paragons didn't really move by that much, nor did Castigators. Immolators and Dominions still seem to be a thing that you can very viably do if you want to. Palatines are often found leading squads, potentially doing some melee or miracle dice combos. The actual standard Battle Sisters are getting a bit more use as they got a points cut in the last update, and it still seems that the Triumph of St. Catherine is still appearing in plenty of top tournament winning lists, even at 250 points. I was a bit unsure whether or not it would make the cut, given it had a massive 60-point increase, but really goes to show just how game warping the automatic 6 miracle dice supply is when taken with the other buffs and things that it does to help out the army. It seems that the Sisters can still be rather monstrous in the right hands, maybe not necessarily a super easy faction to play and win with. Again, an army that maybe forces some big decisions with units getting close and big choices to make as to where you expend precious miracle dice for the best path to victory, and if their units get caught out in the open, they don't exactly have the highest defense in the world, and even less so per point after all the increases. Seems like Games Workshop was saying that they were going to be changing miracle dice in some way in the next update. I don't know if it might be to have some sort of mechanic to make the rolls just a little bit less random, seeing as they did mention it at the same time as Genestealer Cult Ambush. I guess we'll see what they come up with there. Next up, and placing 4th on this one, we have the Necrons, win rates of 52%, so again, while they're strong in the right hands, they're still very beatable. They are another army that's done rather well on the tournament wins though, 4 big events taken down since the balance update, and another one went undefeated, and they do have really quite a lot of high placings. They are one of the more played armies in 40k in general though. In the last update, they had more nerfs than they did buffs, mainly targeting Hypercrypt Legion things, death marks and small units of Locust Destroyers going up, Monoliths increasing, and Locust Heavy Destroyers increasing too. But there were some buffs, maybe most notably for Doomsday Arcs, which were already good, so dropping 10 points wasn't really needed for them. And Triarch Praetorians became a bit more viable if you want to try and make Obeisance Phalanx work. Detachment-wise, Hypercrypt Legion still seems to be the most popular, though perhaps the gap has narrowed a bit between that and Awakened Dynasty, which is definitely having a lot of success, winning some tournaments and placing high at others. It does have some seriously powerful stratagems and better big unit combos, and a bit more focus on characters with the revival stratagem that they have. Teleporting Necrons is still great though. 3-inch deep strikes can basically guarantee that certain secondary objectives get done, and can be very nice for positioning shooting units such as Doomsday Arcs if they're struggling for a line of sight. For stronger units, Katana are absolutely still a feature, though the vast majority of strong lists aren't spamming them, more commonly taking 1 or 2 for a bit of raw power, even if there was that rather horrendous looking 6 Katana spam list that did well in a tournament not so long ago. Otherwise, in Hypercrypts, they quite like their small units, things like Death Marks, individual Locust Destroyers, and Hexmark Destroyers. The Death Marks and the Hexmarks being able to deep strike, which doesn't hurt. Doomsday Arcs for nasty firepower. The Silent King appears in a bunch of lists as a great big power unit and centerpiece. I've seen a couple of people taking him in Obeisance Phalanx as well. Monoliths are still a staple in Hypercrypt Legion, even with a few points tacked on, and leader combos are the staples of the Awakened Dynasty. Immortals led by Overlords or Cryptex, warriors with the same, maybe supported by Lumen or Seraz perhaps, and small squads of Scorpet Destroyers supported by a Scorpet Lord also seem to be really quite popular in Awakened Dynasty too. It's kind of cool to see them a bit more viable with a few other strong things nerfed. In general, Necrons seem to be doing fairly well, at least fairly well balanced externally, and while they might be a tiny bit ahead of the power curve, it's not by crazy amounts. I still certainly feel like there's some winners or losers in the codex though. I feel like the firepower units aren't particularly well balanced now after the Doomsday Arc thing. It just feels solidly better compared with the Locust Heavies and the Doomstalker, which feels a bit weird there given that they were fairly well balanced before. Next up, and ranking in third place on this one with win rates around about 52%, we've got the Astra Militarum. The Hammer of the Emperor certainly seems to be making good on their hype that they were going to be one of the strongest factions in the game after the update. But perhaps the most impressive statistic that they have is they've won 7 big tournaments since the balance update. That's the single most out of any faction and solidly ahead of most of the rest. And even as an army that quite a lot of people are playing, that's quite impressive. If you're going out looking to win a grand tournament, it does look like Guard will give you one of the best chances right now. The balance update didn't really hurt them too much. Bulgarin's got quite a big points nerf, going up from 90 to 110 points, but at the same time they did get some buffs as well. Tank commanders gaining squadron but going up points was probably a buff overall. Ogrin were already kind of fine and got a little better. Field Ordnance might be seen as a bit more of a credible artillery piece, though still doesn't seem to be taken loads. In general though, most of the rest of their options are just really quite solid. Lord Solar remains a godly commander, farming command points and doing orders better than anything else can. Tempested Aquilons are strong to the point of being slightly broken at the moment. 3-inch deep strike for cheap is just amazing for doing secondaries and clearing out enemy backfield objective grabbers. And unless you're playing with that recent World Champions errata that they're doing for that tournament, they can do some slightly horrendous things with rapid ingress blocking charges as well. And regular Militarum Tempestus with Scion command squads can also be a very nasty source of damage to support them. Most of the tank varieties are alright at least. Maybe Exterminators, Battle Tanks, Vanquishers and Executioners out of the main tank lineup. Then tank commanders with Demolisher Cannons are very nasty, plus Rogel Dawn Battle Tanks are great for 240. To screen all them and take the midfield, Hellhounds, Caschans and Chimeras and Ogrins all work nicely. Rough Riders are fairly strong for some countercharge style threat, and Bulgarins are still just about usable, though way less standouts. Scout Sentinels are kind of godly for the 55 points for the defensive stat line, and a nice buffing rule that they provide, and Gaunt's Ghosts can provide some up and down action doing, plus a few more orders as well. Between all that, the Guard really have quite a ton of options, and there's more besides. The majority of lists still going for some sort of tank line for the main damage dealers, something to hold the midfield, a Lord Solar command block, and then some Aquilons and maybe Gaunt's Ghosts jumping around to do secondaries. There's definitely been other things being played as well, such as that Foot Guard list that won a big tournament. In any case, I strongly suspect that they'll be getting at least some balance adjustments next time around. We've already kind of seen that Aquilons are getting some nerfs, and I'm sure that will come alongside a points increase as well. Though I guess any changes in general will be a little bit short-lived, given that we've got the Guard Codex coming out early next year, and that will probably change the faction really quite a lot, with options for new detachments and things. Until any changes happen though, the Guard is still looking like one of the strongest armies in the game. Next up, and in second place on the win rates, but not necessarily the second at the highest levels, are the Chaos Demons, winning around about 53% of games at grand tournaments, but nowhere near quite as much impressive track record as the Guard have for getting wins at top events, only winning the one event, even if it was the single biggest tournament since the update, I believe, although they did go undefeated in 2 others, so they're not really doing all that badly there, and I take that in the context of being played less than half the amount of Guard. I still say that they're perhaps an army that's doing better for the average player, but not quite as strong at the very top levels of play, which I think is often attributed to the fact that they're just really quite focused on their big stompy greater demons. Plenty of demon lists don't feel all that far away from playing things like Knights or Chaos Knights at the moment. Massive amounts of focus on just a few big models, even if they might have a bunch of demon chaff to support them. In the last update, Shalaxi and the Beast of Nurgle got a bit cheaper, which wasn't terrible given that they were both good units before. The Ren Master on Bloodthrone increased a bit, and it doesn't look like as many people are taking him after. In general though, for the strength of most lists, the vast majority seem to be taking something to the tune of 3 to 5 greater demons. Most lists finding room for the Great Unclean One with Endless Gift, just for the ridiculous stack of tankiness that he is with his 4+ Feel No Pain. Maybe a few of the more common supporting units could be things like Nurglings, Khorne Demons like Blood Crushers and Fleshhounds, Flamers and Screamers of Tzeentch, Beasts of Nurgle and Plague Bearers. Though I feel like the majority of the codex is in a place where it won't hurt you too much if you put them on the table, even if some things still feel better than others. In general though, with high win rates and at least okay top performance for the amount of people playing them, they seem to be in a fairly good spot in 40k right now. As mentioned, they might just have a little bit more limitation in terms of skill ceiling and things, even if they do have some fun tricks that they can do with taking things on and off the table and 3-inch deep strikes. They do just play in really quite a different way to the majority of 40k armies out there, with their big emphasis on melee and invulnerable saves and things. They do have some bad matchups as well, seeming to do slightly unusually badly against armies such as Blood Angels, Orcs and Astra Militarum, which maybe isn't the best given that all of those are really quite popular factions at the moment. That just leaves us with one though, and it does seem that 40k might well have returned to a state where one faction seems rather dominant over the rest, at least by the statistics and things, and that's the Genestealer Cults, an army that I just thought seemed mathematically likely to be doing excessively well after the update, given the changes that happened. After the change to Cult Ambush that they made, the lackluster reception of the Codex had kind of lessened a bit, and they were doing alright with certain builds. Then Games Workshop gave them a really big points cut to all their battle line units, the Primus, the Jackals, and a few more. And the result seems to be that their win rates are all the way up at 58%. By my counts on these, they've got 5 on the next greatest competitor. They seem to be doing that both at more competitive and more casual levels. And despite their fairly small player base, they've managed to get 3 big tournament wins since the balance update, and going undefeated at another 2, using a variety of different detachments and unit approaches. The most played detachments at the moment seem to be Biosantic Brood Surge, Host of Ascension, and the Outlander Claw currently. Kind of interesting that they're all at least somewhat balanced, given that they really emphasise quite different units. Biosantic Brood Surge will be spamming Aberrants and Pure Strains. Outlander Claw going heavy on the Jackals and the Transports. Maybe Host of Ascension having a bit more use for lots of their battle line and things like Primus combos. Xenocreed still seems very playable as well, but a little bit lesser played compared with the rest, and the Brood Brothers is generally not used so much. Again, I'd say their biggest weakness is perhaps the Genestealer Cults not being quite such an easy army to play compared with some. Maybe requiring a bit more thinking, planning a few turns ahead, and having to make gambles as to whether or not your Alpha Strikes are going to be enough to take out certain units or not. Plus there's the risk that the Cult Ambush table could go quite heavily against you, and that could make the difference of a lot of points not returning to the table in the later game, if it doesn't seem to be rolling your way. Despite that though, if you've got a list that's built to the detachment and a plan for how it's going to come together, it seems like they might not be the hardest army to win with right now. I'd like to say that Genestealer Cult is perhaps vying with Guard for one of the strongest factions at top level 40k currently, and almost certainly going to attract some nerfs in the next balance update. I feel like some of their points cost changes that they had weren't really all that necessary, given that they were doing alright before in the right hands. I guess like the Sisters Games Workshop had already said that they were going to be doing some sort of revision to their core mechanic in December. My hope is that it might be something to make Cult Ambush a bit less swingy, as it's a bit of a random mechanic at the moment. They sort of had to patch the way it works with units coming back because it didn't work so well in the Codex. Obviously they don't really need any more strength at this point, so hopefully they manage to make it both a fun mechanic and balance the army with the points cost they have for it. Seems that the time of ascension is now for the Genestealer Cults though, they're doing rather well. Otherwise though, and just as slight counterpoints to win rates and event wins, I thought it could be interesting to see how well armies are doing in terms of placing high at tournaments, weighted by the amount of people who are playing with them. So basically a rough and ready measure of how high people are performing in terms of tournament placings. So what sort of ratio of people reach the top tables? These ones are going by Meta Monday's data, which will be linked in the video description along with the rest. So play rate versus amount of armies that either won all their games or just lost one in a 5-round tournament. It's interesting to see the changes on the list compare with that. The Genestealer Cults still are absolutely at the top. The Adepta Mechanicus crop up after that in second place though. Although I can't help but think that they're probably going to be one of the single most random statistics out of the entire set of them, given that there's really not that many people playing them at the moment, seemingly even less than usual. Otherwise, we also have Necrons and Chaos Demons placing highly. Again, Chaos Demons not really played by as many people, but have at least managed some event wins and undefeated placings unlike the Abmech. Drukhari and Thousand Sons are also a bit overemphasised here. We've also got Death Guard, Sisters, Guard and Leagues of Votann making up the rest of the list. Otherwise, beyond these, even if they're not performing quite so well on these numbers, the Orcs and Chaos are still worthy of a mention as well. They've also been winning a bunch of tournaments too, even if the performance of the army for the average player hasn't been quite as strong as some of the rest. In any case, let me know your thoughts as to which armies you feel are strongest and weakest in Warhammer 40k right now. What's your interpretation of the statistics? And if you'd like to see a similar one like this for the armies that are performing on the lower end of the win rate spectrum, feel free to check out the 9 weakest armies video I've got, that's linked in the video description below. Finally, I'll just cycle back to the video sponsor in the Magnet Baron, as mentioned earlier, supplier of magnets and components for Warhammer 40k, with a good range of M52 super strong magnets for swapping out weapons, components and bases and things from one model to another. For some of their more popular things for Warhammer 40k, they've got their magnetic flight stands. Games Workshop's flying bases often attract criticism for being a bit too easy to snap off or not holding on properly, and I'll admit I've converted a bunch of my flying bases to have magnetic tops. These ones have a purpose-built solution. They've got ones aimed at various different miniatures, with different sizes appropriate for everything from big grav tanks to individual jump infantry or smaller flying things. For swapping out weapon options and things, they've got a bunch of kits that are designed for certain 40k miniatures. The one I mentioned before was the Questoris Knight kit, which is a particularly popular miniature to magnetise, often done with perhaps a slightly more ad hoc and fiddly method of drilling and assembling some supports for magnets with plastic sprues and things. That's certainly how I did mine, so it's kind of cool to see someone doing a custom built solution, supplying both the magnets and the bits for them, so you can take a Questoris Knight and have any variant of it ready to go. For that one, it looks like they've even produced a step-by-step instruction of how to do so with the kit. Really quite detailed instructions and photos if you want a little bit more reliability that you're not going to mess up the model too badly. They've got plenty of similar kits like that, some of them which are more aimed at the sort of drilling and mounting magnets type thing, some with 3D printed bits like the Dominus Knights. There's a set with enough magnets for a couple of armigers here. Kind of fun to be able to magnetise the arms and waist joints as well. I've done the waist joints on my armigers and knights just for transport purposes. I've got some other things aimed at stuff like the Monolith, Invictus Tactical Warsuit, Archaeopter and the Rogor Dawn. Besides that, they've just got more general sale magnet supplies if you want ones of any given size, plus some specific tools aimed to apply them, such as these magnicator things that are super glue resistant. And one thing that could be of interest to at least some people out there are some flush fit magnets designed to have the exact right height for under Games Workshop's bases. Ones of 2.2mm height for smaller bases or 2.6 for slightly bigger ones. They could be of use if you're trying to attach bases onto a magnetic storage system. Otherwise, as mentioned earlier, there's just the general starter set that they have. A selection of magnets including a pin vise, drills and glue and things. Could be a nice all-in-one thing if you want to get started with some of the things that other people have happily used for magnetising miniatures. In any case, a big thank you to them for sponsoring the video. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description. As mentioned, their products tend to be quite a bit more affordable in the USA, but they can ship overseas at a premium. In any case, I'll leave it there for this one though. Let me know your thoughts as to some of the strongest armies in 40k right now. Look forward to hearing all your takes down in the comments. If you'd like to see more like this, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Check out the channel's Patreon page or the discount affiliate links down in the video description if you'd like to help support the channel. But otherwise, just a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.